Imagine you discovered a lottery ticket in your backyard. Not just any lottery ticket, but one worth billions of dollars. And the best part, absolutely nobody else knows it exists. It's just sitting there, waiting for you to pick it up. What would you do to protect it? How far would you go to build a wall around it, hire an army, and declare yourself the king of your own private empire? In the mid-19th century, nations did exactly that. But they didn't build their empires on gold, oil, or land. They built them on something far more bizarre: bird droppings. This is the forgotten story of the Guano empires, a chaotic, multi-million-dollar historical gold rush that turned barren, uninhabitable rocks in the middle of the ocean into the most fiercely contested real estate on Earth. It's a story of unimaginable wealth, corporate greed, secret island kingdoms, and a brutal collapse that proves one simple, timeless truth. When you build an empire on a foundation of dust, it only takes a single gust of wind to blow it all away. To understand how bird poop became the most valuable commodity on the planet, we have to look at a silent crisis that was threatening to starve the entire Western world in the early 1800s. Think of a farm like a smartphone battery. Every time you grow a crop, whether it's wheat, corn, or potatoes, it drains energy from the soil. That energy is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. In the 1800s, Europe's population was exploding, but their soil batteries were completely dead. Farmers were desperate. Famine was scratching at the door. And then, explorers made a mind-blowing discovery on a chain of tiny, desolate islands off the coast of Peru. Most notably, the Chincha Islands. For thousands of years, millions of seabirds, cormorants, boobies, and pelicans had used these dry, rainless islands as their personal toilets. Because it almost never rained there, suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the pie. The Peruvian government quickly realized they were sitting on a literal mountain of gold and monopolized their islands. But the rest of the world, specifically Great Britain and a young, rapidly growing United States, wasn't about to let Peru have all the fun. In 1856, the US Congress did something absolutely unprecedented. They passed the Guano Islands Act. The droppings didn't wash away. Instead, they baked under the equatorial sun, solidifying into massive, mountain-sized layers of super fertilizer. We aren't talking about a thin dusting here. We are talking about solid cliffs of bird manure over 150 feet deep. When European scientists analyzed this stuff, they realized it was a miracle. It was like giving steroids to plants. A tiny handful of this guano could multiply crop yields tenfold. Overnight, the guano gold rush was born. This law, which is still on the books today, essentially said, if any American citizen finds an unclaimed island covered in bird droppings anywhere in the world, they can claim it as US territory, and the US military will back them up. Let that sink in. The United States authorized its citizens to go out into the high seas and play pirate king, claiming sovereign territories in the name of fertilizer. Within years, adventurous merchants, captains, and corporate syndicates claimed over 100 islands. These weren't just mining camps, they were de facto micro-empires. They had their own laws, their own private police forces, their own currencies, and their own absolute rulers, the corporate bosses who controlled the white gold. If you were to look at the marketing pamphlets in New York or London at the time, these islands were painted as exotic, adventurous frontiers of prosperity. But the reality? They were hell on earth. Let's look at Navassa Island, a tiny, jagged coral rock in the Caribbean, claimed by the Navassa Phosphate Company. Because these islands were so remote, there was no natural fresh water. There were no trees for shade. Temperatures regularly soared past 100 SF, 38 cc. The dust from the guano was so thick and caustic that it would burn the workers' eyes, blister their skin, and fill their lungs with toxic ammonia fumes. And who was doing this back-breaking work? On Navassa, the company recruited newly freed African Americans from Baltimore, promising them good wages and an adventure. Once they arrived on the island, however, they found themselves trapped in a system of neo-slavery. They were forced to work 15 hours a day under the brutal whip of white overseers. If they fell behind, they were beaten, tied to posts in the blazing sun, or starved. On the Chincha Islands, thousands of Chinese indentured laborers faced the exact same fate. The conditions were so horrific that dozens of workers chose to leap off the high rocky cliffs into the ocean below, preferring death over one more day in the guano pits. But back in the United States and Europe, the aristocracy didn't care. The mansions of Rhode Island and the grand estates of London were being funded by the sweat and blood of these remote island kingdoms. The owners of these micro-empires were becoming some of the wealthiest men on the planet, living like royalty off the backs of virtual slaves. When you push people to the absolute brink, eventually they push back. In 1889, on the micro-empire of Navassa Island, the pressure cooker finally exploded. Tired of the brutal beatings, the rotten food and the scorching heat, the laborers revolted. Armed with nothing but their mining picks, shovels and stones, they rose up against their overseers. The riot was swift and violent. 5 officers were killed, and the workers took control of the island. But this wasn't just a local dispute. Because of the Guano Islands Act, this was technically a rebellion on U.S. soil. The U.S. government dispatched a warship to crush the uprising. 3 of the worker leaders were arrested, brought back to Baltimore, and sentenced to death. This sparked a massive landmark legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Jones v. United States. The defense argued that the island wasn't actually U.S. territory, and that the U.S. courts had no jurisdiction. But the Supreme Court ruled otherwise, cementing the concept that these far-flung corporate rocks were indeed American territory. The lives of the workers didn't matter, only the protection of the corporate empire's property. For a few decades, these micro-empires seemed invincible. They dictated global trade, influenced foreign policy, and filled the pockets of tycoons. But every empire built on a finite resource has an expiration date. By the late 1890s, the inevitable happened. The soil was running out. Decades of relentless, industrial-scale mining had completely stripped the islands bare. What took nature tens of thousands of years to accumulate was wiped clean in less than 50. The mountain-high cliffs of Guano were reduced to flat, barren rock. And then came the final nail in the coffin. In the early 1900s, 2 German chemists named Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch made a revolutionary breakthrough. They figured out a way to extract nitrogen directly from the air to create synthetic fertilizer. Suddenly, the world didn't need bird poop anymore. They could make fertilizer in factories, faster and cheaper than ever before. Almost overnight, the value of guano plummeted to zero. The corporate syndicates packed up their gear and abandoned the islands. The ships stopped coming. The elaborate docks, the wooden barracks, the tram lines, and the luxury villas of the island governors were left to rot. The micro-empires vanished just as quickly as they had risen, leaving behind nothing but ghosts and rusted iron. Today, these islands are mostly wildlife sanctuaries. Jarvis, Baker, and Navassa Islands are completely uninhabited, closed to the public, and guarded only by the descendants of the birds that built them. The ruins of this forgotten era serve as a fascinating, almost haunting analogy for our modern world. We look back at the 19th century guano rush and think, how crazy was it to build entire global networks, fight legal battles, and enslave people over bird droppings? But are we really any different? Today we build our empires on oil, rare earth metals for our smartphones, and silicon. Just like the guano of the 1800s, these are finite resources. We mine them, we fight over them, and we build corporate kingdoms around them, assuming the supply will last forever. But history has a funny way of repeating itself. The next time you look at a massive, seemingly invincible global industry, remember the forgotten guano empires of the Pacific. Because no matter how big the kingdom, when the resource runs dry, nature always reclaims its land. If you found this deep dive into history fascinating, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What do you think is our modern-day equivalent of the guano gold rush? Don't forget to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.